So today we filled out a form with Singularity University suggesting that we might lead a discussion in a number of different areas. I suggested the area of spiritual understanding, but then decided not to go that direction. I thought it best to go with the notion of the UN Office of the Future and what it's going to look like and how it's going to be. So that's going to be my first lecture, is what is the UN Office of the Future and how is it better than any other program around today? How is it going to be better than the SDGs for formulating a framework for our thinking? Framework for our thinking. The SDGs not only have a bad framework, the thinking behind the SDGs is also lacking. This is something that I don't know how to communicate it. This is maybe why I best, when I present, invite my friend Dr. John DeMartini to communicate for me, because I think he's probably the best communicator on the planet today, the best, from all the teachers that I've met and learned and studied with, better than even Jean Houston. Take that one, Dr. John. Better even than Jean Houston. And Jean Houston is the best. But I can't get her attention because I once made a mistake and she has not accepted my apology for my mistake. In fact, my mistake has proven to be correct. It wasn't a mistake, it was an observation that she took too personally. And not only did she take it too personally, there was never a healing to come from it, because she took it really deep. I had made the metaphor between Taraheo and her. I made a bad metaphor. Those of you that know Taraheo might full understand her level of upsetness, and I should have known better, but I didn't. I used a metaphor comparing her, I wasn't sure if it was her or my friend Howard, our inability to communicate with her. We just weren't able to. And here it is, well over 20 years later. My gosh, I still consider her one of the best teachers, but I have to say that she did a lot of teaching at the United Nations. And what I never learned from her was, how was that? How did that go? How many of the United Nations organizations were you able to communicate with, given that the ones that sort of found you there knew that you were one of the best, or not the best, the best? And how was it that your teachings only got to a portion, a small portion, and I have no idea what portion, and that may be something that she can teach me. What portion of the United Nations benefited from her teachings? This was quite a number of years ago, over 10 years, I think. So this would be a good question to ask Jean Houston. What did you learn from teaching at the United Nations? What did you learn from that? What's the best way to communicate with the United Nations? We thought that going through the Global Compact would be a good idea. However, the Global Compact, unfortunately, did not live up to its agreements with the ISO 26000 group. Now, this is maybe it's a personal criticism that I was not able to convince the ISO 26000 of doing anything more formulative with the United Nations. And I think there was an obstacle to that, and the obstacle's name is or was Stefan Soderberg. He was the co-chair of the ISO group when we were developing the ISO 26000 standards. This man's obstructiveness, although he doesn't feel that he is. I mean, while he's not referring people to UNDRIP, he's referring people to another program that is not ISO 26000 standard. Well, let me say, I don't know. I don't understand what his relationship was with ISO 26000 now that it has been formulated. I have asked him in no uncertain terms why, as co-chair of the ISO group, why did he not insist that the United Nations Global Compact implement the ISO 26000 throughout all of the UN agencies? 90, according to George Kell, and 32 to most other people, but between 32 and 90 is a number of agencies that exist that are not aware of what the ISO 26000 standard is, and probably have less knowledge about the United Nations Global Compact than most agencies should have, because most agencies don't pay attention to the United Nations Global Compact, as far as I can tell. So this is a personal observation, is that most UN agencies do not support the Global Compact. Or if they did, they would be promoting the ISO 26000. That's my conclusion. And my conclusion is not based on any evidence. It's just sort of like, I guess you would call it the rights and responsibilities of an agency. An agency has the right to claim itself as a United Nations agency, but it has a responsibility to live up to the standards of the United Nations. And the United Nations, other than through the ISO 26000, has, and I should say there are some other ones, but we would call them the Ruggies, the Equator Principles, and some other ones. And we'll leave it for the moment.